There are a lot of really wonderful things about living in Italy, and at the same time, you also have to look at some of the realities of what living in the country looks like. And unfortunately, there are many things that are just pretty overcomplicated about making a life there, living a life there. I'm Rafael Di Furia. Welcome back to another episode of Not Your Average Globetrotter, and roll that intro. Even though I've not lived in the US for more than a decade and a half, there are times that I do think about what things are like there versus what is available in different countries. And I live in Portugal. This is where I am. If I haven't made that clear over the last few weeks, I live in Portugal. But don't get me wrong, because I do love Italy. So please do not take this video the wrong way. But there's one thing in particular that I've mentioned in previous episodes, and that's in regards to finances. Not about earning an income, but there's one thing in the US that I've not really seen abroad. I've mentioned it in a previous episode of Not Your Average Globetrotter, and that is the credit score system. Being able to leverage how good your spending is and how responsible you are towards other projects. For example, it could be a business or your own home, car, a credit card, whatever it may be. In Italy, you don't find that type of system. There is, however, a list, but it's more of a bad credit list, like a blacklist. Don't give money to this particular person for X, Y, or Z reason. So if you do want to get a credit card or a loan, whatever it may be, that you could use in the US, based on your credit score, you won't have that same ability in Italy. You'll have to leverage anything that you're doing off of what type of work contract that you have or lack thereof, or what you have been able to show in your previous year's tax reporting if you are a freelancer. And if you are a freelancer, then maybe in that case, maybe it's going to be a little bit tougher to get a credit card or loan. This next one, I'm going to say, is more complicated than it needs to be, but I kind of get why it is the way it is. So, depending on where you are, you may actually have to pre-purchase a ticket before you want to get onto a bus. If you're getting onto a metro, that's more of a given. But if you're wanting to get on the bus, in some places, you might have to purchase the ticket before you even get on. But in some other areas, you might have the ability to buy the ticket once you're on, but at a higher price. So yeah, okay, like it totally makes sense that maybe pre-purchasing the ticket would be for the best. And it would make it so that there's not going to be this huge line for people trying to get onto the bus, and that the bus can just keep on moving. Because if you've ever taken an Italian bus, you know that sometimes things are on time or they really, really aren't. When we're talking about buses, of course, Italy doesn't just have regular land buses. When you get to Venice, you have the water bus. And there was one time in particular that I was trying to take the water bus from somewhere, maybe it was even Piazza San Marco, whatever it was, it doesn't matter where. I was trying to get the water bus from a stop that didn't have a ticket machine. And there are a number of places that I've seen in the city where there's not one. And you can't just go anywhere to buy a ticket. You have to go to somewhere very specific. In a lot of towns in Italy, you'll be able to just buy a bus ticket like at a tobacco store, a tabaccheria. I've mentioned about them. And like, say, for example, I think last week's episode, you can pay taxes there, pay your bills there. You can do a lot of different things at these places. But also sometimes you can even buy bus tickets or lotto tickets. Hey, they got a little bit of everything. Why not? Get your tobacco fix while you're at it. But in Venice, I can't say that I had the same experience. And there was one time in particular, I had to walk around and around and around and around, almost to the point that the distance that I had to walk almost took me all the way back to the train station where I needed to get to. So yeah, it was a little bit annoying at the time. Just before we get into the next section, I do want to say a huge thank you to those of you who help to make these episodes possible on a monthly basis through rafaeldifuria.com/Patreon, patreon.com/RafaelDiFuria, as well as the one-time support through rafaeldifuria.com/support, as well as the super thanks button on YouTube. All of that support really does help this project to be able to move forward, as well as thank you to those of you who take part in the conversation down in the comment section below these episodes on YouTube, as well as now on Spotify. It all really does help this project to be able to continue. And with all that said, let's just jump into the next topic. Another thing that I can see how there's a positive to it, but also there's an overcomplication that I sometimes wonder how necessary it is. And that is the political kind of parties and how many there are. There are so many different political parties in Italy, each one kind of having some overlap with another party, and you never really have enough for a full majority for the government. And so you have to have these coalition governments that try to get along, but maybe don't really get along, but then they get along for just long enough so that one day another party that's a little bit bigger says, hey, come on over, hang out with us. We're cool. We like you. We'll give you the things that you guys are wanting that you're not getting from this current setup. And then the government changes without anybody voting for the new government. I mean, while I was there, however long, 5 years plus, it was maybe 2 or 3 governments and I think only one national election. So that's something that it's a little bit different for me. But even though I do think it is overcomplicated, there are times when I think it's nice that people can have a party that maybe aligns a little bit closer and have more options to what their particular beliefs are. And do I think a 2-party solution is the best option? I'm not saying that, but maybe there would be some kind of happy medium in between everything. Another thing, though, that can be a little bit overcomplicated in Italy is if you are moving from abroad, you might not be able to convert your license, especially if you're from the US. And so this could mean that if you want to get a license in Italy, that you might actually have to after a certain period of time. You might not be able to continue driving on a foreign license unless you've gotten your license from another country. Different topic for a different day. There are some countries that are allowed to convert their licenses, their driver's licenses, to Italy. But if you do have to get your license for the first time, there are some complications. For example, maybe you've been driving your whole life, but you would have to probably still go to a driving school for obligatory courses, not only theoretical, but practical. I've heard of some teachers saying that if you can prove to them that you've driven before, that sometimes the practical side of things, it's not quite done in the usual way and probably not by the book. I'll phrase it that way. And no, don't ask me for any referrals because I don't have them. I don't know who these people are, genuinely. So even if you say bring your kids to Italy and you are thinking that one day you're going to go to the local parking lot and be able to teach them, drive them around and do what you did maybe with your parents, that's not going to be possible in Italy. And something I found out recently, which I don't know all of the details about, but apparently for somebody getting their license for the first time, they're actually restricted when driving an automatic car, at least for, I think, the first couple years or first year, whatever it is. There is a restriction that you can't drive an automatic vehicle until after a certain period of time. It is more common to find a manual car in Italy than it is automatic, and maybe for an emergency situation, it could be better to know how to drive that manual car regardless. Another aspect of life that is a little bit more complicated than maybe it needs to be is dealing with the bank and especially opening up a bank account. It could be that before opening up a bank account that you would actually have to visit the bank at least maybe once, twice, or I've actually had the experience where I had to go 3 times before they would be able to open up the account. A lot of paperwork. There are signatures on top of signatures on top of signatures, and it takes a while. It wasn't quick. Although the funny thing is, comparing it to Portugal, it might be actually a little bit easier, but still, like, you have to give them a reason why you want a bank account, and they're not just going to plain flat out give you a bank account. And then there's also the factor that you might have to make an appointment to open up a bank account, even if you just want a plain simple account. And this is actually one of the good things about Italy is that there are online banks, but if you are not Italian, sometimes there can be complications, especially if you hold an American passport. So the amount of banks that might even want to work with you to begin with, that's not an overcomplication inherently about Italy, but maybe that's also with being an American citizen abroad. And then with banks, you also have to keep in mind what hours they're open and what hours they're not open, because some banks, when you think they might be open at a convenient time for their customers, like say, for example, lunch hour, they're going to be shut tight and not available. At least a lot of banks are like this. And then they'll have a couple hours in the morning or a few hours in the morning and then some in the afternoon, maybe only in the morning. It depends on the bank, the branch, the location. There are a lot of factors that go into this and can make it a little bit overly complicated. But another factor about living in Italy that can feel a little overcomplicated, I kind of get it, but at the same time, it can feel a little bit much. And that is dealing with what are called ZTL. these areas are controlled traffic zones that not everybody can drive through all the time. Maybe there are certain times of day when the restriction is not there, or certain days of the week when there's no restriction on driving through these areas. Generally, they happen to be in city centers, so there's not a ton of congestion. And so the people who live in those areas have easier access without being bogged down by traffic. For people who have nothing to do with living in that area, and then also even parking can become an issue. Parking is definitely an issue in many Italian towns. Granted, it is a big issue in many European cities overall. But say, for example, you're talking about the historic center of a town. This area will probably be within this controlled traffic area. If you don't have the permission to be able to drive into it, you could have fines on top of fines, and then it could be 50 euros, it could be 100 euros, it could be more. It just depends on the town, and it depends on the local rules. It seems as though there are some towns and cities where you can buy like a day pass, or you can apply for permission 72 hours ahead of when you're actually needing to go into that area. So that's another aspect that can be a little bit overly complicated. And just as an example, maybe you're out with some friends and one friend is the designated driver, but they live outside of the ZTL and you live inside of the ZTL. And for them to drive you, if they could drive you to your home, would only be maybe 3 to 5 minutes in the car. But because they have to drop you on the outside of the ZTL, maybe you might have a 15-20 minute walk home instead of being able to get a ride straight up. And then you might even find some taxis, if you ask them to go into a ZTL, they might not actually want to go into it. It all depends on what city you're in, the specific taxi driver, local rules, but there are some situations where even, like I said, you can get a day pass or a short pass to be able to drive into the ZTL. Maybe through like a phone that you send a text message with the license plate, and you buy a little card that has another code on it that is kind of like topping up, like how you used to have to do back in the day if you ever had like Track Phone or Virgin Mobile. Although on that thought about phones, prepaid phones, in Italy, you don't really have those, I guess, burner phones or burner like numbers that you can just buy a SIM card, be in and out of the shop in like 5 seconds, and pop it into your phone for a temporary period of time. I mean, maybe you just need a phone number while you're on a trip. Or maybe you need a backup phone, like you have one phone for work, but your personal phone, you don't really need anything there just other than getting an SMS or receiving a call just for dual factor authentication. You might not actually need that personal number, but you just don't want to have it on your work phone, whatever the reasons could be. In Italy, this isn't an option that really exists. If you're not a resident of the country, you might actually be limited on the types of service that you can get, and they're usually a little bit more expensive. Sometimes they have decent deals for people who are traveling to the country, but if you are wanting a quote-unquote prepaid plan, it's kind of like a contract. You have to give your ID, you have to give your tax code, you have a bunch of papers that you have to sign through, and it will function in some ways like a prepaid card or a prepaid phone line, but there's a lot more of a headache that's involved with just getting it. I mean, that's actually one thing here in Portugal that's convenient. Not that I've had to use it, but I've mentioned this in previous episodes. When I first arrived here, I went to the phone store. I said, hey, I want to find out more information about this line, that line, the other line. He's like, you know what? Don't make a decision today. Take this free SIM card. You can use it for up to a week. I don't know. I had like 35 gigabytes on it and I don't know, X hundred of minutes on it, 200, 300 minutes. And the guy said, just make sure that the network works for you, that you're happy with the coverage and that it works in your home and that everything is good. I was really impressed by that. I was like, do you need my ID? How much does this cost? He's like, no. This is for free. This is for you. Take it. After living in Italy, that was a big shock to me to hear about that. This is becoming more common in Europe, the Italian way of doing it, or maybe I guess the Italians have followed other countries that we'll just say do it for security reasons. I'm not going to get into all the specifics just because of how much YouTube loves it when people talk about certain topics. This last one is definitely silly, but to me, it's just kind of funny because it goes to show how sometimes things that don't need to be complicated can be complicated in Italy. And electric scooters, like those rental scooters that you might find on the side of a street, this could be the case in the future, but electric scooters in Italy are supposed to have license plates on them. I think that's enough said right there. Like I said, I love Italy and I loved the time that I lived there. There are just factors that are sometimes a little bit more complicated than maybe they need to be. Anyway, I'm Rafael Di Furia. Thank you for joining me for another episode of Not Your Average Globetrotter. And a thank you to those of you who make these episodes possible and take part in the conversation down in the comment section below, as well as share these episodes with your friends. Stay safe and healthy out there, and I'll see y'all next time. Later.